welcome to another episode of Let's Talk. I'm Jade Harrell, and I'm joined by Amber Clear today. We're missing a couple of our ladies, but while they're out of town or not available today, no doubt they'll be learning some great things to bring back to us, which gets me thinking, what is something new that you have learned? Amber, you're always learning something.
Well, right now I'm learning to breathe through my nose. So I just got my nose fixed, and I learned that there are nurses who are trauma informed. And so when you go under anesthesia, if you let them know that you've had trauma, they wake you up in a different way. They actually brought two of my friends back to bring me out of anesthesia in a more calm way.
What?
Yeah, and it didn't work, but it helped a little.
Do you have problems with that
I didn't before, but I do now. After,
so how's the schnoz?
It's honestly, I don't know what I was so afraid of. I think I liked the shape of my nose because it had been broken internally. So I was worried that I would lose my natural face, I guess.
I love the
and
face.
Honestly, I didn't realize how much I wasn't breathing through my nose.
Wow.
And now I can. Sleep is wild. I'm just out here raw dogging oxygen. I can smell in 5K. But most importantly, I learned, like I said, that there are nurses that if you tell them what's going on, they'll work with you. And that's amazing.
Education.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Trauma-informed nurses are everything.
Trauma-informed nurses, trauma-informed care. I love that.
Yeah.
I think for me, I am learning to believe the truth about myself.
Good.
And not the lie. And when I say the lie, the big lie, I'm reading a book now called Inner Fitness.
Okay.
And anything you believe or perceive is greater than you and you are small is not a complete story. And an incomplete story is a lie. And that was freeing to me.
Oh, an incomplete story is a lie.
An incomplete story is not the truth. It's not the whole picture.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I am learning to trust and love and be kinder to myself and ask what's possible.
As you should. I think people sometimes see you're such a confident, vibrant woman, they don't always know what's going on.
I get busted. But we all have those moments, but I think I'm certain, actually, not even think anymore, that putting the things in place that make my footing more sure makes all the difference.
I think you cut the dead weight in your life, and then you can soar. I know
the truth.
That sometimes there are people who pretend to help you out, or they want to be around you because you are this vibrant person. And you have to realize that they're only there for the good things, and you have to cut them back when you're going through some stuff, and then you can shine again when they're not holding you back.
Yes. Well, thank you for that. And I'm certain that with our topic today, we can shine a lot better with less hate and more love. And we're going to learn a lot about that by the end of today's show. We have Karen Aroesty joining us. When we come back, she recently started her own company to help organizations deal with bias in all walks of life, prioritize optimism and compassion, as well as much more. So stay with us so we can stay back the hate and enjoy some more love. We'll be right back.
Queen is just my everything.
His smile did it. His smile, his eyes, his knowledge. My landlord, he decided that he wanted me to move based on the fact that I was transgender. Let's just respect people in everyday life for just being human.
And welcome back to Let's Talk. Our guest today is a regional leader with decades of experience in driving change and transforming organizations. We are honored to have her joining us today. Please welcome Karen Aroesty. Karen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Well, what a way to start a new season.
Okay. Oh, I hope I live up to expectations.
Well, not just for us, but for everyone. Tell us about where things are with you now.
They are still in an education and advocacy space, which is basically where I've been for the last many years.
Yes.
And looking to create positive impact and know that in this town there are an awful lot of good people with whom to do that work.
Tell me about how you carry that out and what's the climate like right now?
Okay, well, I'll do the second part first. The climate's a little bit of a challenge,
Sure.
which you may understand. I still think there's a lot of meat to be able to be addressed. So timing is everything. I came here from a meeting this morning of the U.S. Attorney's Hate Crimes Task Force, which meets quarterly and has been meeting here since 1997 and is officially chaired by the U.S. Attorneys for Eastern Missouri and Southern Illinois, but has close to 100 community representatives around the table, law enforcement folks, as well as advocates of all kinds. We talk about hate crime. We educate around hate crime, and we talk about community building in the face of hate crime. There was an incident Friday in Creve Coeur that involved a young man at a grocery store who, without provocation, attacked somebody to the point where he was assaulted. Charges have been filed in the case that involve motivation for discrimination. And so we talked about that. What does it mean for this community? What does it mean for the victim and the victim's family? What's the role of the law enforcement side? What comes after you do all the procedural bits and pieces? And what's the difference between intent that needs to be proved to show hate crime activity and impact, which hangs around a whole lot longer than the law enforcement procedural stuff.
And probably much broader as well
And
because
much
of
broader.
the impact and community trauma.
That's a huge thing because it's not just who was targeted. It's not just the language of the targeting that was pretty plain. Everybody plays in on this, especially those who represent continually victimized communities. So it's a challenge.
Can you take us back a little bit and give us a basic education? So how do we define hate crimes? And then how do you and the coordination of these efforts and organizations address it?
I got into this because with my many years with the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL had essentially drafted hate crime statutes that are law around most of the country now, statewide and federal. And a hate crime is essentially where the perpetrator chooses the victim, and they can be right or wrong because of their perceived or actual connection to a targeted group. And traditionally, the protected categories under this law are race, religion, national origin, ethnic background, and gender identity, sexual orientation. That's been growing over the years. In some cases, states also include age. Not all. Some do.
Let me know where that may be.
Some of those are closer to my heart than others, right?
I'll be approaching that pretty soon.
That's a good point. And so I think the issue around hate crime has gotten much more sophisticated, and we're really only talking about formal approaches starting in the late 1980s. This is not something that has been on the books forever. So the challenge is not only how do you educate law enforcement folks to do the right thing in response, how do you protect targeted communities? And then how do you build community? So I got into it many years ago that way.
So when situations like that happen, how do you proceed? What's an ideal series of events on your side?
The ironic answer is the first thing you do is wait. And the reason I tell you that is because you have to have some investigation first that's going to show that, in fact, the victim was targeted because of this. Whether it's rape, the intent. The intent is everything. If you don't have the intent, you might have a different kind of crime, which you could prosecute, but not necessarily hate or bias.
So if they can't prove the intent of a hate crime, then do you just have to step away?
For those of us who are uniquely in that space, yes. And then you let the law enforcement community take over and prosecute it for the underlying crime. Because there has to be a crime there on which the motivation plays in. If there is an intent issue that comes up and the motivation is a piece, then it's about layers. Then it's about going into the public arena and going on the airwaves and bringing groups together to maybe have press conferences and educate about why this particular community is a target and what happened. And maybe even, depending on the perpetrator, some background about how the perpetrator came to this point. I think there is a.
Do you think when you explain how the perpetrator came to that point that you are almost further victimizing the population that was targeted, because you're almost, it feels like sometimes you're justifying it?
Ooh.
That's an interesting question. I'd have to be thoughtful. I think it's different in each case. I don't think you can generalize from event to event, and it really depends on that person. People like to think that white supremacists are committing hate crimes all the time. Fact is, they don't. Most hate crimes are not committed by people who I would call professional haters. It's impulsive, and sometimes it's based upon lived experiences where you're in an environment where people keep saying to you, they are bad, they are worthless, they are less than.
And when people let them say it, it becomes acceptable.
And when you get to the point where you decide to act on it, because as what happened Friday night in Creve Coeur, some sort of unprovoked anger just triggered this perpetrator. Now, there may be mental health challenges there. That happens a lot. Doesn't mean you still don't move forward and protect the community at large by saying this qualifies to be talked about in the hate crime context, even if the end result is that perpetrator may not go to jail. They may go into some formal treatment approach that may be more beneficial for them in the long run, and frankly, protect people down the road.
Sure.
And then what do you do with the victims from that
Victims
perspective?
just need support. I will say they need support. It depends on the victims. I've been in settings where victims don't want support.
Why would that be? What happens
because
in those situations?
Who wants to be a victim?
Yeah.
And especially
it's a shame.
It's
a shame that they
there
feel.
is a shame issue. I think that's exactly right. And especially if you're being targeted because of your unique identity, you don't want that to be a negative.
Sure.
And you're like, okay, just leave me alone. Let me deal within my community.
I think it's also, victims sometimes feel like if they accept the help, they have to admit that something happened. And sometimes it's easier to, I don't need the help, it wasn't that big of a deal, because then they have to admit to themselves the monstrosity and the ripple effect that this can have.
Right, and I would say at this unique time in history, things are a little different than they were 20 years ago, which is communities sometimes just didn't want to show up.
Sure. And so over the course of 20 years or so, let's say even maybe 50, how the landscape has changed or the acceptability of it. And I would imagine there's degrees of crime, because when we think about these things that are unprovoked and maybe built up over time, could there be aggressions, microaggressions, and things that actually do significant harm, and maybe even more so now because of that?
I think people are more aware.
I
just think there's been a lot more awareness, more acceptance, more willingness to be understanding. And I think that happens in a really robust way in communities. It may not feel like it on national stages, but people feel empathy really quickly. I mean, think about Dylan Roof and Mother Emanuel Church, and think about the Squirrel Hill, the synagogue in Pittsburgh in some years ago, and the JCC in Los Angeles, and the Hindu temple here, and the Muslim mosque in Joplin. They happen consistently, and generally what people do is they step up to help.
Sure. We're looking at help, and we'll probably need to go into more of that after the break. But getting a sense, are we preaching to the choir? Are the people that need to hear it being reached in a way that can help protect, prevent, and maybe create some inroads there?
I think we've made greater strides with the law enforcement community in the last 25 years, big time. And I consider them to be allies. It is very rare that the federal and state, by the way, don't step in when they need to.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to take a quick break because this is certainly something we need to dive deeper into, but most certainly need some more understanding. So don't go anywhere. We'll take a quick break. Stay with us. We'll have more with Karen Aroesty when we return. Stay with us. Welcome back to Let's Talk. We've been talking with Karen Aroesty with Aroesty Allied. Aroesty Allied is bringing groups together to address hate crimes. We're talking about hate, widespread hate, and then the subsequent actions of those that follow up on it and the impacts. What is your optimism in this work about what can be done?
I have enormous optimism, and I'll just say that when I created my firm in 2021, I called it Aroesty Allied because anything I ever did that was good in this region in my work in advocacy, I didn't do alone. I had to have people as part of the conversation, as part of the activity. So I push that notion of working in community with allies. I also push the notion of relentless optimism. The world is hard nowadays. And when people are in institutions, whether they're in the nonprofit, public, or private sector, change is often seen as a negative. People are afraid of change. And it is hard. It's fair that people have hesitation, but this is the way we've always done it. Why do we have to do it differently, kind of thing? When you come at these kinds of challenges with relentless optimism, you change the conversation. You use different language. You talk about allies. No one has to hang out there by their own in order to accomplish change. Mm-hmm. And so I have found that using optimism as a literal business and cultural strategy changes the outcome.
You can make business sense out of optimism.
But it seems to make sense to me.
Yeah.
Look, you can have the business imperative for change. I have no problem with that. You want to make more money, you want to sell more widgets, more power to you. And when you do it more optimistically, more positively, you tend to bring people along with you. We see pretty quickly what happens when you come at people with negatives. Even people who want to support what you want to do.
Yeah.
Negatives are hard to overcome. Positives and optimism and aspiration and opportunity, those for me are action words.
I think with the advent of social media, you control the bias that people have. And so that's important that you control that tool. You
can. I mean, bias is one of my favorite words.
Is it the B word?
I think, and in this, again, in the last 25, 30 years, in which sort of the original kind of education that we used to do around what we called prejudice reduction. Or let me take you back even farther. Sensitivity training. The first thing you hear is, let me go in the other direction. I don't want to have anything to do with that. That's a waste of my time. And people, I think, are more open now to understanding that bias is just human chemistry. And the science of bias isn't about us being bad, this sort of all or nothing, you're either good or bad. And therefore, if you're biased, you're bad. That's hogwash. And so the ability to talk about bias even in a positive, optimistic space and say, okay, I got it. I'm going to deal with it. The thing I really don't want to do is cause harm, right? So I'll try and figure out how to minimize my bias or have it go in a different direction and still do the good work, make friends, influence people positively.
Well, there's power in authority or there's power in influence. And that's how you bring it back to this bias. You can control people's acknowledgement of their bias. And then if they can acknowledge it, they can adapt and adjust.
Love the word adapt. And let me insert from power, because the power privilege dynamic can be one that is potentially hard to talk about in certain spaces. And I like to emphasize the notion of leadership as opposed to power, because people who are leaders have power, but how you play it out is the game changer. One of the other things I've been doing in community for the last, not too long, last couple of years, is a group called Compassionate St. Louis. I want to lift up this notion that you can be strong, you can be a leader, you can commit significant substantive change in community, and you can do it with compassion and not be weak in the least bit.
Well, I think the greatest strength comes from being able to allow yourself to be compassionate and be vulnerable, because it says, look, I'm strong enough to show my belly. I'm strong enough to show you my soft spots.
Totally
and that is the ultimate strength.
All that seems to resonate well with us, but we're in a culture of might is right. And where that differs, or at least I'm wondering how that impacts the shared idea of being allies, and how do you sell these relationships that are already pretty strained?
That might is right is only happening in one unique conversation. I don't accept it otherwise.
I love that.
More power to
We can
them
say
that think
that.
they can actually do good in the world, because I feel people want to go out and do good in the world on a daily basis.
They do. And I think that it's becoming more popular to be an ally, and it's becoming more easy, more accessible for people to speak out against things that are bad and put out the positivity.
Yeah, so we can talk about the advocacy side a lot. On the education side, it's how do we bring people into that space to say, there's lots of good ways to do things. There are lots of different ways to do things, but in the end, that compassionate piece, that listening piece, that who am I really, one of my other favorite words nowadays is otherness, right? If I really understand people who are different than me, and I don't have to hook, line, and sinker accept everything, but I want to do good in community, so why don't I step up to do that, business imperative, community imperative, or otherwise?
Sure. And many times it's because we haven't interacted with someone other in any way, and that's a new occurrence. Take us through the calls to action. This is something that's going to take a unified effort, or at least a widespread effort, not only to educate, but to start to enroll in the idea that it's possible. What are you looking to accomplish, and how does the community help?
People are excellent within their spheres of influence, right? In their neighborhood, in their religious institution, in their school, in their business. If I could ask for one thing, it's don't be a bystander. Figure out a way to really be present and see what's going on. Are there people in your world who are feeling less than because somebody isn't an ally? And are you not stepping into the conversation? And if you're nervous, you might say something wrong, then that's okay, say that. I'm nervous, I might say something wrong, but I kind of feel like I want to do something here. I want to help. One of the things that happened in this incident in Creve Coeur last week was that there was a bystander in the grocery store that stepped in to try and prevent the perpetrator from further harm against the target.
Wow.
What is the expression? If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem.
Exactly. That's
what
fair.
bystander kind of represents to me.
That's
that
fair.
You have a moment in standing,
Yep.
or be double-minded about
Right.
it.
Yeah.
So bystander, you're split there, and that's in that moment that something incredible can happen. But I think we need some kind of way to feel better about the risk. We're more in a survival mode than a thrival community mindset because of so many threats and fears. What do you?
Okay, so the issue of risk is fair to raise, but I think then we really need to ask ourselves, what are we truly afraid of? And if we really can't come up with something significant that would harm us in this, then I think we have an obligation as citizens of the world to step in.
I think not everyone too, like anybody who sees something happening and they're not physically able to stop it. I think we have to acknowledge the fact that do what you can with what you have.
Totally.
So
One of my
if you
favorite
can't
authors
physically
is a
stop,
little girl
call.
who has a book called "What Can You Do?"
Yeah.
Ava and Mommy. Even if you're facing whatever, you can take that question as far as it'll ride.
Yeah.
Well, what can I do?
Yeah.
What can you do?
You can, a lot of times you can record the incident, you can call the police. Just don't add to someone else's trauma. That's all I ask.
Yeah, and it's all legit.
Well, that's a heavy order, madame. But it's necessary. I think
it's
the
doable.
trade-off,
I think it's doable. And from
the
a school,
cost is just
from a
immense.
school institutional perspective, if
Sure.
we started having that conversation with our little ones, even in first, second, third grade, the science says by the time kids get to third grade, they've developed a lot of the internal resources that they can carry through.
Sure.
So we really start early, and then we can emphasize all the positives going forward.
Sure.
Again, that relentless optimism piece is just never going to be far away from any conversation for
I'll
me.
take it. Well, sign us up.
Cool.
We must be relentless if we are to take on the immense challenge of hate and crimes and harm that stems from it. Karen, thank you for
thank you
not
for the
only the
invite.
work you're doing, but for bringing that education and opportunity to us.
It's nice to talk. Appreciate you.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's truly been a pleasure. If you would like to learn more about the work that Karen is doing through Aroesty Allied, you can visit her at aroestyallied.com. That's AROESTY, aroestyallied.com. Stay with us. There's more Let's Talk when we return.
No doubt you're going places, young lady.
Thank you. And thank you for the interview as well. I can imagine it was the last thing that you wanted to do after such a long campaign meeting.
You really are a very intelligent young woman. You're very smooth.
You're very smooth yourself.
You have no idea.
Let your haters be your motivators. What a conversation. I don't even know how they're going to tackle this problem, but I guess
With positivity. That's what
with optimism.
With positivity and
one
optimism.
bite at a
Yeah.
time, I would imagine. So what will you do to counteract hate?
I think we all know I have no problem speaking up when I see something. I am getting smarter about how I do it. So it's more about de-escalation than instigation.
Yes. I will work on avoidance because as a natural peacemaker, sometimes I need to maybe take a stand for something more than just a neutral or pleasant solution.
I think both of us have the natural peacemaking
Yeah.
gene, and I think sometimes we hesitate to call people out for something. And so that's something.
So
that
has
we've
this
gotta-
happened to you because you're so nice and then you get to a certain point, do you like
Yes.
blow up,
Yeah, I
pressure
think for the longest
cooker?
time I tolerated a lot, just in life, but that I shouldn't have, because toxic positivity, but also because I was afraid to hurt the other person's feelings, or I was afraid to make too much of a ripple. And now I'm like, I'm not gonna make a ripple, I'm gonna make a wave. I'm gonna create an ocean.
Well, what the world needs most is love. And I feel like my main job is to love God and love people. And apparently that's the best counteraction to hate, because that can turn into love and understanding. I hope.
Understanding is everything.
Well, if anything, understand that I'm not an island and nobody else here is any greater or less than myself.
But also understand we're not about to play anymore.
This is what we're not doing in 25. We will not tolerate hate, and we will celebrate, see, and love one another. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have. So haters, you'll have to catch us next time. We'd like to thank our guest, Karen Aroesty, and thank all of you for tuning in at home and joining us. The show may be over, but you can always find us on Facebook, X, Instagram, and YouTube, or visit us at stltv.net. I am Jade Harrell with my darling Amber Clear. We'll see you next time on Let's Talk.